much everybody thinks that physical interaction and in-person interaction is better than virtual interaction. So now we're going to prove you wrong.
Well, I think that there's definitely cases in which in-person is better when you're cooking for somebody or when you're singing together. Oftentimes making music's very hard to do virtually, or, certain obvious things that you can only do in person.
Yeah.
But I think that we do want to challenge the view that you have to be in person in order for it to be an incredible, meaningful relationship that's as good or if not better than the relationships you have in person. And I think that, a lot of people did have bad experiences during the pandemic when they shifted to virtual engagement.
If you are going to be on a call for 8 hours straight a day, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
that's not a mystery to anyone, but I think we really want to push the point that virtual interaction and in-person interaction are two different things, and one is not just better than the other.
Inherently better. And one point is also that virtual interaction will continuously get better as we have, virtual reality or augmented reality and more technological advancements that make virtual interaction even better, whereas in-person engagement is just going to stay the same. It's been the same for millions of years. That's not going to change anytime soon.
And we can go off on these reasons totally, and I want to do that. But just to preface, I think we really want to talk about this because a lot of homeschoolers, or really anyone, has, especially parents though, for their kids, has the mindset of, I guess the worst case scenario is that we have to engage virtually.
Right.
But is there a way that we can switch it to in-person?
Right.
And we have seen a lot of, when parents join WEquil school, a lot of parents have that mindset of, how can we do it in person?
Right.
But we have seen a lot of that. We have seen that mindset change in pretty much all of the parents that we've talked to.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, when it comes to really young kids, you do need in-person play.
Well, like I said, they're different.
Yeah, but when it comes to, especially for older kids, when you're trying to intentionally engage around a goal or a topic or an interest, that's when virtual interaction can really become better. And there are some specific things that are possible with virtual interaction that aren't possible with in-person that we can start to talk about. But one that we've noticed in kids is that it can sometimes be hard to build confidence in children, especially because all the adults and the older people in their lives are all way bigger than them, right? They're all looking down.
They're all taller.
Yeah, and so as a young child, you're always looking up, and of course, you're going to feel an inherent sense of, I am below this person because you're literally looking up to them. But on Zoom, everybody is the same size.
Everyone's the same size.
And you can even be louder if you turn up your input volume, right? You can increase your presence.
That's something I find very valuable because I'm a little kid, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also small for my age.
Yeah.
I know someone who's my age, and she is at least 3 heads taller than me. And it can be frustrating sometimes because I'm this puny little kid, and no one sees me. Literally. No, I'm just kidding. But
you're microscopic.
But but learning, but presenting virtually and all that has taught me to be more. It has taught me to project more and to move my arms around so that people see me.
Yeah.
And that's a really good skill to learn.
I think that's another thing to talk about is as a young person, you don't necessarily know how you're coming across, but you can literally see yourself. It's how would you do that in an in-person environment? You would hold up a mirror so you could see your facial expressions. That's
a bit awkward.
That would not be a good thing.
Right now, I don't know how I'm coming across. This isn't a Zoom meeting where you can see.
Yeah.
There's a camera there.
Yeah.
And then, but I don't see how I'm coming across.
But especially we'll record a demo day presentation, not necessarily to share publicly, but then kids can watch their presentation and be like, oh wow, maybe I shouldn't have been picking my nose during my presentation or something, where like, those are just things that are obvious when you watch yourself and you're like, okay, me fidgeting like that was very distracting. But otherwise, you wouldn't be able to really perceive that. And I think that can really help with self-awareness of how you're coming across.
So number one is that
increase confidence.
Yeah.
Through bigger presence.
Number one is increase confidence when you are projecting your voice. Like, I actually find that sometimes I speak too loudly because I am used to projecting my voice and having this sort of posture. And the reason why is because, one, I practice public speaking, and two, it was virtual. So I had that opportunity to sort of talk as an equal and to have people look up at me, or at least at eye level to me. And then, so one is that, and then two is that you can perceive yourself, whether it's recording like on this podcast or in real time. You can see how you're coming across.
Can be really helpful. Also, this is kind of a silly small thing, but it can be really convenient to have somebody's name on their video, so you don't have to constantly be like, oh, I'm sorry, I asked you this 30 seconds ago, but what's your name? That can be helpful. Also, there's like emoji reactions if you want to try to, express certain emotions that you're having without just being like, if you really appreciate something someone said. I really appreciate this as somebody who's not a super expressive person. Like, I'm not gonna be like, whoop, whoop,
That's something I would do.
Yeah, but you would do that, but not me necessarily. And so if I can just, have like a little clap emoji or something that's just, it's more subtle. It's not super distracting, but it can help with that kind of engagement. And also just kind of the whole, having the chat there can also help if you want to have a conversation, but not interrupt, and not just, if you're like watching someone's presentation in person, but then you're like leaning to the person next to you and like talking to them, like that can definitely be perceived as rude. But then there's also like, private chats and also group chats where you can even like be taking notes. And there's also so many opportunities for AI, because now a lot of these, meeting platforms are integrating AI to take notes, to have transcripts and all of that. And I think that can be really, really cool to be able to, you have this meeting, you don't necessarily need to be like taking notes frantically the whole time, but then you just literally get the notes. And I think that it can also really help with keeping up relationships if you don't feel pressure to have to like go drive somewhere to meet up with somebody.
I think that's the one that a lot of people like I think if someone who hasn't been convinced yet and started watching this podcast, they'd be like, yeah, duh, you don't have to drive places. There are other things that are, but that is a big reason. I think that's the most intuitive one, where it's like, if you don't have to drive somewhere, or if you don't have to go somewhere to see someone, then it's a lot easier to keep in touch with them, because the barrier to entry is a lot smaller. I think that's a big one, especially for military homeschoolers, because they're always going places, right? And they're always moving around and moving, and it can be really hard for them if they don't stay in touch with their friends. But if their friends are all virtual and they're learning pod, like on WEquil School, then they keep in touch. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think there's just so many new things that are coming out as well, where you can have things like, in like polls to get people's reactions, or like a lot of games that you can use. And
we're not saying that virtual relationships, like virtual interactions, are always the best. I think we want to... I want to spend a little bit of time sort of roasting virtual relationships, because we want to see that we have both sides of the perspective, and then also share like, okay, who would be best for more virtual relationships, and what is the best time to use it?
Well, here's the thing, is that I think it really just depends on if you are intentional with your virtual relationships, because I think that part of how virtual relationships can be much better and more fruitful than in-person relationships is that oftentimes it has to be intentional. Like, you're not going to keep up with someone virtually unless you do have that intention, because with an in-person relationship, it can be kind of coincidental. Like, we happen to be riding the bus to, work every day. So we're just going to sit next to each other and talk, and we have this relationship because of just kind of accidental interactions that happen because of close proximity.
That's actually like a majority of most relationships.
A majority of relationships do come from either blood relations of, like, we're family, or just physical proximity. Yeah. And I think those, of course, you can have great relationships that come from that, but it does kind of stem from a very arbitrary reason.
Yeah.
And when it comes to virtual relationship, you don't really have that. If you're going to continue to engage, it has to be very intentional of, either I joined this virtual group that has this particular interest because I have this interest.
Well, now you're sifting through the entire world, not just the people who live near you.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that's something that people haven't necessarily fully understood is like, hey, you can find the people that maybe are share your interests, also share your values, also have similar experiences. Maybe they have a similar personality. Like, you can just find, like, who is the ideal relationship for you. And I think that people...
The perfect person.
If you know...
That does not exist, but you get the idea.
Yeah, but if you know who that is, you can think about, how do I attract those people? How do I put myself out there in a way where I can actually find those people who share those things, who I want to collaborate with towards certain goals? And I think that that's the reason why it can be just like... why do we need to be in person if we have such a shared understanding of our values and our goals, and we're working towards something together? You don't need the convenience of just like, I'm going to bump into you on this day. It's like you're actively reaching out because it just, it makes sense, right? And I think that is what really makes a virtual engagement much better.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really matters in terms of the I guess the essence of any relationship is the reason, the why are you engaged with this person? And regardless of if it's virtual or in person, if you have a stronger understanding of that why, it's going to be a stronger relationship.
Yes.
And so of course, virtual engagements can be very surface level if it's like, we're not even engaging on a meeting, like we're just messaging and we're not really sharing anything genuine about ourselves.
Not talking about just a like on social media. Yeah. That's completely
that's
different.
Not a
we're talking about face to pixelated face on a call, right? And on like on a call. Exactly, on a call. And actually talking on it. I just want to make sure we clarify that, because some people might be confused, being like, okay, none of these fit with my idea of virtual interaction. Yeah. But yeah, so it's actually talking pixelated face to pixelated face or voice to voice, right? Yeah. And yeah, I think that I agree with that. If you really know the why behind your relationship, then you're more likely to keep it up because you have a reason to keep it up. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do think that for little kids, there are some people who are not necessarily going to be naturally...
We're not saying that you only have to engage virtually. Yeah. Obviously. Like, you want to have a good mix of both, but I do think that we do want to change kind of the stigma around virtual relationships of like, oh yeah, you can't really connect with people that way. It's
totally not.
It's like you can if you have a actual reason why, and I think that's part of what we want to help children to develop. The part of what we develop at WEquil School is an understanding of who I am, who do I want to engage with, what are my interests, what are my goals, so that you can even start to be intentional. Because if you don't know those things, you can't be intentional about your relationships. But once you do, that's when you can really start to engage with people in a meaningful way, regardless of whether it's in person or virtual.
And as technology continues to improve, and the reasons why you would choose virtual relationships over choose virtual interactions over in-person reactions, and those benefits continue to improve and grow. I think it's really important that you learn how to find those relationships and be intentional, because that is so important if we are going to be engaging through technology, which on the whole is not very intentional. Like for social media platforms, it's not very intentional. But if you want to find those people that you're really going to connect with, you do need to be intentional. And that's tough, but that's a skill you need to learn. Yeah, but one thing that you also need to learn is to develop your your Zoom fatigue resistance, because if there's one thing that I do not like about virtual interactions. I keep saying relationships, not virtual interactions, is the Zoom fatigue. But again, these are some things that you kind of have to combat because we are living in a world of increasing.
I think Zoom fatigue is highly correlated with whether or not you actually think you're getting value from that engagement.
Yeah,
like,
that's
I think
true.
it's like you could be super engaged in a meeting for like 2 hours, be super hyped, and it's no Zoom fatigue if you're actually engaged and you find it helpful to you. And then the moment it's kind of something that you're like, I don't think this is really adding value to me.
Yeah, that is
That's
true.
when the Zoom fatigue happens, and I think that people have this idea of Zoom fatigue that just happens as a linear correlation with the time you spend on Zoom. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, that is true.
I think it's about the quality of engagement, and I think that if you really have a great understanding of the reason why you're engaging with these people, then that's what can make it a even more fruitful engagement than if you were in person.